Hello, I'm Morgan Pechma, and this is City and State TV. Today, our guest is Fordham Law professor and gubernatorial candidate Zephyr Teachout. Ms. Teachout, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
This has been an exciting week for you. How are you feeling about it?
I feel great. I feel like, 5 days ago, I had been planning to run for governor for a while, but I certainly hadn't met most people in New York and most of the press corps, and people have responded with incredible warmth and excitement. The press has been, not just the press coverage has been great, but what I appreciate is that there's been a real openness to new ideas and to talking about things in a different way, to looking at our economy in a different way. So honestly, it has been, I wish I'd won the Working Families Party nomination, I really do. But in other ways, it's been a better week than I could have imagined.
Was that a disappointment? I mean, do you feel let down at all by the party?
No, I don't feel let down by the party. I'm still disappointed. I wish, like I said, I would have loved to run for governor with the Working Families Party background, but I understand their choice to make a different nomination for a different set of reasons, and I plan to be working with the Working Families Party for probably the rest of my life. We have a lot of shared values.
Do you think that was a cynical calculation in any way?
Not the slightest bit cynical. What I think is that I actually think most of the state of New York and the Working Families Party all have a belief of a New York we want to get to. It's a New York for the 99%. It's a New York with great public schools, not just sort of settling for decent public schools. It's a New York with real industry, small businesses, great jobs. And the decision at the Working Families Party convention was about, how do we get to that world? I have a vision about how we get to that world. I'm going to keep pursuing that vision, maybe through running for governor, maybe through some other means. And the 58% of the Working Families Party voters who chose to endorse Cuomo have a different vision about how to get there, but I don't think there was a shred of cynicism in it.
How did you embark upon this journey? Were you approached by the Working Families Party, or did you approach them?
They approached me, and then I talked to some other Democrats, so talked to people from different political allegiances. Honestly, it did not take long for me to say, I absolutely want to do this. I'd actually always dreamed of, I'd love to be a chief executive. I have so many ideas about what we could do in the state. I hadn't thought this was the path, but the plans were sort of sitting in my suitcase when they came along. And I love campaigning. I've worked on a bunch of campaigns. I've worked on presidential level campaigns. I feel like I know both how to do the campaigning and how to do the governing. So it was a pretty easy choice.
And do you see yours as a statement candidacy,
No.
or are you in it to win?
I'm absolutely in it to win. I think the difference between a statement candidacy and an underdog, they can look the same, but the difference is the underdog wants to win. And I want to be governor. I have a real vision for this state. I have a vision of a economy that works for everyone. And I have a vision about how we can get there. So I know I don't have $33 million. I don't know if I'm going to have the money to run, but I know that if I ran, I'd have a chance of winning, because the New York I see in the future is so much closer to the New York I think most New Yorkers see. Governor Cuomo has been a real disappointment. Talk about disappointment. I supported him in 2010. I supported him in part because he said he would actually do something about taking on corruption. Here's this attorney general, hard driving. He hasn't done anything about it. Not meaningful. He's done a few things here and there, but the system is rigged right now, and he's part of that broken system, and he's not going to fix it. So I feel like it's really important for people who have this different vision to have a voice.
If that is the case, what you're saying, I mean, hasn't the Working Families Party and essentially, given the governor a pass on all of those, on that failure to address corruption, and made this deal predicated upon promises that may not necessarily be lived up to?
He better live up to those promises. So I don't know if you're viewers know what the series of promises are. This wasn't my deal, but he did promise to finally pass public financing of elections, which would allow all kinds of people to run, whether or not they're have the political background or not. It would allow people who only have middle-class friends to run instead of people who have rich friends to run. I know the Working Families Party is going to hold them to that promise, and I'm going to hold them to that promise. But I want to keep, I want all of us, whether in the Working Families Party or Democrats or Republicans, to demand so much more. I don't think we should have to sort of settle for some governor who only under the threat of a unknown law professor running against him decides he might finally follow through on some promises. I think we should have a governor who actually wants to fix Albany.
Was that staggering to you that you could be such a threat to the governor of New York?
I'd like to be modest, but no. I think that there's a lot of weaknesses there. The misalignment between the governor and the state is so great that it didn't actually surprise me that he was a little worried about a challenge. He's been comfortable not having to really confront somebody with a deep set of democratic values who would challenge him. Why have the bank tax rate at the rate it's at? I mean, there's some real nonsense in his budget. I'm worried that the nonsense comes from the fact that it helps donors as opposed to actually makes economic sense. And so I want to get out there, have the debate in the weeds, but also have the big debate. Like, what kind of New York do we want? His economic vision is tax breaks for billionaires. So he's weak because that's not most people's economic vision.
Do you think that maybe that is a misperception, though, of what the state's identity is? I mean, on a whole, polling shows kind of consistently that New Yorkers fall more toward the center than toward the left. But it sounds like you think that the larger populace kind of embraces this progressive vision for New York State.
Well, center, left, right, all those get very confused. We want to talk about brass tacks. Everybody thinks we need to be fully funding education except Governor Cuomo. Not everybody, but that's one of the highest polling issues. And when I talk to parents, they're crying because of what Common Core and high stakes testing are doing to them. The way in which Common Core has become wed to this teacher measurement is hurting the teachers, but it's really hurting the kids. They're really upset that their schools don't have arts in them. They're really upset they don't have music in them. So you can call that left, right, center, I don't care. I just know that's where New York is. They also don't want an upside down tax system. So sometimes you can get away with messaging, and if I run against Cuomo, he and I might say the same thing sometimes because he can read the polls and say the right things, but I mean it. I actually really want a coherent tax policy. I really want economic development plan, and I think his record shows that what he tends to pursue are things that either help his personal political ends or things that help his donors.
But, let's say a middle-of-the-road Democrat who makes largely safe, self-serving decisions. I mean, is this a larger critique of the Democratic Party in America, or is this really, targeted specifically at Andrew Cuomo? Because I feel like that kind of criticism can be, painted across the party in the country.
No, I think that's fair enough. I think there's two main structural problems. The first is how campaigns are funded. And I don't blame people if they need to raise a lot of money to get elected. But unfortunately, it's really shaped what Democrats do when they're in office. That's one of the problems. The other is I actually think there is a missing piece in the way that Democrats sometimes talk about why we are where we are and why the economy has fallen apart and why we have no jobs. And I think that missing piece is understanding concentrated economic power. Since 1981, we've seen this radical concentration in every area, in agriculture, cable, in banking. You could pick your area. Right now, US Foods and Cisco is about to merge. Starting in the early 80s, that stopped being a political issue. Both left and right just accepted we're going to have enormous concentrated corporate power. Both Occupy and the Tea Party in their sort of vague ways were trying to challenge that in some way. I have a vision about how we can really analyze that and change it. It's a Teddy Roosevelt vision. We got to return to core commitment to small businesses, family farms, decentralized economy. I know how to do it. I think that's the sort of missing piece in the left right now.
Yeah, no, I mean, I wonder about that trust-busting mentality, whether that is even feasible in our world, because, you know, I often think about when you have to raise $1 billion.
It's not unconstitutional.
It's not unconstitutional, but I mean, when you have to raise $1 billion to become president of the United States, how is it not by nature that you would have to make so many compromises that kind of keep you stuck in that plutocracy that you're talking about? And I wonder if, you know, this was kind of a watershed moment for New York State in a way that if the Working Families Party had gone with you, I mean, that would have been exactly pushing back against all the things that you're talking about. But the fact that the party could be perceived as equivocating and kind of, you know, validating all those things, that says to me that there's not necessarily the appetite to take on that attack at the core of the system that you were talking about launching.
Okay, you got two big questions. I'll take them one at a time.
Yeah.
I think it was a watershed moment in the opposite way. The Working Families Party almost supported an unknown law professor with a vision for a trust-busting, a decentralized economy over the sitting governor with an enormous amount of money. We're right at the edge of changing the way that we are changing our confidence in confronting power. And I think it was a watershed moment in how exciting it was that so many people were supportive. I got 41%. And I got 41% against a governor with party leaders and the mayor organizing against me. So I think that suggests this increased sense of possibility. But to your first question, there's an extraordinary sense of helplessness right now. I think you reflected that in the way people talk about Comcast or Walmart or Amazon. And I think one of my jobs is to open up that hopelessness and say, no, we don't have to be. We're not actually impotent in the face of this power. This is like 1896. Concentrated power can be dissolved. I'll give you a great example. The governor could say to the Public Service Commission, do everything you can to stop the Comcast Time Warner deal in New York. You know what I think would happen? I think you'd see Republicans, Democrats, Greens, Working Family Party all coming together to say, yes, I see my cable bills rise. It's terrible. I see my options in terms of media shrink. And, you know, if you're a worker in one of those industries, it is really hard to negotiate when you only have one person to negotiate with. So I think there's these little pockets, you know, starting with Comcast Time Warner, maybe talking about Amazon and how it's really destroying the New York publishing industry and potentially threatening other parts of our economy. Like we can start challenging it. We're not going to do it tomorrow. It's going to take a long time, as it did in the progressive populist era of 100 years ago. But I think we need to open up our brains and sense of possibility.
You talked about corruption. How do you address corruption in New York State? I mean, it has been endemic to our politics, and we've had something like 35 legislators arrested or indicted in the last decade. How do you address that systemic problem?
Yeah, the core thing is stop focusing on the guys with big bags of cash and start focusing on the system. So what that means is I support a public funding system where every $5 donation that a candidate gets would be matched by $60. I'm getting the numbers wrong, 6 to 1, $30 from the state. What that would mean, just think about it. It can sound really wonky, but it's not.
Well, we have it in New York City, so it's not unfamiliar.
Right. But think about what it means when you wake up in the morning and think, okay, I got to raise, you know, I'm doing that now as I'm trying to think about raising money. Think, I got to raise $100,000. If you think you can raise it from going to give speeches to community groups, you're going to be thinking about what those community groups want. If you think you can only raise it, the only way is by going to venture capitalists, your brain is going to be filled with what those venture capitalists want. So the success in New York City is fantastic, but to really change it, you need it to be statewide because all politics is tied together. So I think New York should be embarrassed that it's behind Connecticut.
Well, we have public finance elections in New York City, yet we still have a wealth of corrupt politicians.
Yeah, you're never gonna fix everything, but you can gradually over time change the culture. And the way you change the culture is changing the source of funding. What people care about, I mean, it's fun to watch somebody get dragged away. There's some entertainment value in that and some sadness in that. But what we all really care about is we want the people who represent us in government to treat each of our interests equally and to think about that equally. And so when I talk about corruption, forget criminal law. And I think actually when most people talk about corruption, they're not talking about criminal law. I think they're talking about the sense that politicians are just serving the few.
What are the mechanics now of you exploring a bid for the governorship?
Well, it's so ironic because, of course, if we had publicly funded statewide elections, there would be no mechanics. I would be announcing today, I really want to run for governor. I really want to be governor. So I now have to do that thing which I critique, which is talk to folks.
Go hat in hand to rich people.
What?
Go hat in hand to rich people.
Go hat in hand to rich people. But I don't go hat in hand. I can't. It's not in my nature. But go to those who can fund at high levels and say, I can't make you any promises, but we all know something's wrong in this system, and I can be a voice for that. And I really hope I can put together the money. I have to do it in a really quick amount of time. So that's the project. In terms of support, most people in the state don't know me. This was an inside Working Families Party convention event. I don't feel like I'm known, and I'll spend the summer doing that. But I know the ideas are known. Everybody knows what it's like to be fighting against a big corporation, and everybody knows what's wrong with that something's wrong with our jobs and politics. So if I can raise the money, I'm quite confident it'll be a very successful campaign.
Would you think about taking the Liberal Party line?
Oh, yeah. I have been, it's probably not. But I teach election law, but I teach constitutional election law, and I've been spending more time in the weeds of New York election law in the past week than I ever thought I would, and trying to figure out these things. I mean, for me, the Democratic primary is the likely route if I go forward. I think we want to have this contest in the simplest, cleanest way. What's your vision for what it means to be a Democrat in the Democratic state of New York?
And I mean, how has this been different from your expectations jumping into it?
It's a great question. I expected I would get the nomination. I didn't actually expect that Governor Cuomo would come forward with the deal he offered. So I guess the expectations today are different. But I'm a real student of politics. I've worked on a lot of campaigns, and the reason I'm even running is because I know he has a lot more money, but I know that magical things and just kind of beautiful and terrible and difficult things happen in politics. It's like the novel of America sort of played out. And I think it's really important actually to go in with deep commitment to values and a deep commitment to strategy, and then a comfort with the fact that chaos can happen at any time.
If it doesn't work out with the Democratic primary, just because obviously it's quite a uphill battle to raise that money, do you feel like you've gotten the bug now that you will pursue elected office again in the future? Should Governor Cuomo be dreading your existence from here to eternity?
Well, he should. Whatever I do, he should. That guy does not have enough people just saying the truth, just the truth about how he uses power, just the truth about what his policies are. So that's Cuomo's problem. That's not my problem. But I love people. That Will Rogers quote, I never met a man I didn't like, period. I sort of was born with that. And I love politics, and I love people, and I particularly love people when they are taking on power and then thinking about the public and trying to decide what's best. I actually think that's I think that's one of the most beautiful things about America. I mean, I hope to be in public service in one way or another for a long time.
Zephyr Teachout, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.